I think this is, oh, you can hear me, because I can hear myself. Good evening, everyone. It's 5 o'clock. We'll get started. First off, thank you for being here. I'm excited to introduce our speakers for the Bogan Lecture Series. I first want to acknowledge Mike and Rebecca Bogan, who are extraordinary supporters of the department in many capacities, not the least of which is this lecture series that allows us to bring in guests from leading firms in the industry. So I'm very excited with that in mind to introduce two of those and two friends of mine, Emily Bullock and Lydia Gikas Cook. Emily is a principal at Spackman, Mossop, which is a landscape architecture and urban design firm in New Orleans, Louisiana. Her work specializes in creating resilient, community-focused designs that address urban challenges and environmental sustainability. Emily has been instrumental in projects like the Blue-Green Corridors plan in New Orleans, which received an ASLA Honor Award for its innovative approach for integrating water management in public spaces. I personally find her work to be creative, meaningful, adaptable, and it's allowed her to make a significant impact in New Orleans specifically, but really all over the country with her work. Lydia is a senior associate at Hilderbrand, which is a renowned landscape architecture firm with offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Lydia is, as well as New Haven, Connecticut. The firm is acclaimed for its thoughtful and elegant designs that harmonize with the natural and built environment. Lydia has contributed with projects like the New Orleans Museum of Art's Sculpture Garden, which we'll hear about today, and the Franklin Park Master Plan in Boston. And that particular plan for Franklin Park was received an ASLA Award of Excellence in 2023, which is the highest honor that a project can receive from ASLA. Her work exemplifies a deep commitment to enhancing public spaces through innovative, but what I really appreciate, through context-sensitive design. And for full disclosure, both Emily and Lydia are classmates of mine from graduate school. I've been able to follow their work for many years, and I have the privilege of knowing that beyond sort of being great designers at great firms, that they are both grounded and relatable and generous with their time, specifically their time today, in coming here and meeting with our classes, our students across a range of years, from sophomores through graduate students that are finishing up this spring. So it's a testament to their knowledge and their ability to distill complex ideas and share those ideas with clarity. I think it's what makes them accessible and engaging as both designers and people. And so with that being said, please help me in welcoming Emily and Lydia. Thank you.
We haven't shared, but Lydia was an intern in my office a long time ago. And I was at a time in my career where I had no business managing an intern. Yeah. But we have stayed very close over the years.
Your webs will continue to weave.
You don't know how they'll all overlap in the future. Well, we're so honored and flattered to be here, and we have enjoyed our visit to meet all of you and get to hear your projects and your questions today. We've really enjoyed ourselves. Peter, thank you for inviting us. And when we were first talking about, conceptualizing this talk, we were like, what do we want to talk about? And I think both Lydia and I agree that there is a part of practice that we don't talk about very much, or that you don't hear lectured about very much, which is the people involved in design. And it's not something you learn too much about in school. Obviously, you're learning some very big skills in terms of design. You're learning site analysis. We talked to a lot of you about that today. You're learning concept design. You're learning about documentation and construction administration. But we don't often in school talk about all the different people and how they're involved in practice. So that's how we got to our topic, is we're going to talk about something that you don't always hear about in school and is sort of not really talked about in practice either that much. We don't talk about this part of it. So our talk is about colleagues, contractors, and communities, the people and partnerships that shape practice. So we thought we'd show a couple of images of ours, these like pretty complete projects. And we want you to look at these pretty complete projects and just like take a guess. How many people do you think were involved in making this pretty picture? Or this pretty picture? And we made a not comprehensive list just to get you thinking about this. But there are architects, there are landscape architects within our firms. There are project teams made of principals, project managers, designers, administrative people, marketing people, interns. Then there is that at engineering firms. There are structural engineers, mechanical engineers. There are city permitting folks. There's your client. Sometimes your client isn't one person. Sometimes your client is many people. Sometimes there are stakeholders you have to consult and all kinds of permitting agencies. And there's just a whole slew of folks that you have to engage with when you're working on a project. And I think Lydia and I really agree in this way that having skills around these interpersonal relationships and how to collaborate and work with people makes a project what it is. It makes your project successful, it makes your project enjoyable, it makes it all so much easier when you also focus on these types of skills, and not just like, can you draw really well, are you a good designer, but like these are critical skills involved in the design process.
Yeah, so I think what we really want to get down to is like the notion or kind of illusion of the starchitect is like, that's not reality. And it probably never was, but it certainly isn't anymore. We all work in teams. That's the best part of doing this job, is learning and growing and collaborating with people. And so we want to kind of pull back the curtain and share process and messy and unfinished pictures and sketches and really give you an idea about, what is it that takes working together and the collaboration with other people to make this happen. So the first one that we want to talk about, which is, probably an obvious place to start, is our colleagues. Beyond the people outside the office that it takes to make a project happen, you have a team in your office that you're working with. And that is a range of different people with many different backgrounds. I think one of the great things about landscape architecture is we've all come to this from different places. We have different interests, and there's room for all of that in the field. So we want to talk a little bit about our offices, the work that we do, and how we work in our teams, and how that may be similar or different between the two places that we work. So I am going to start off introducing Reed Hilderbrand. Peter mentioned we have offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and New Haven, Connecticut. Cambridge is our home office. That's where I work. And we are an office of around 70 people. We're all landscape architects. And we have a kind of wide range of backgrounds. We have probably 20 different school programs represented. We have like 10 different countries, 15 or 20 different states. So people are coming from all different places, all different contexts, all kind of educational backgrounds. And we work across many different project types. This is kind of like our version of how we kind of think about those in different buckets. So we can work on urban waterfronts or on campuses, college campuses. We do a lot of institutional work. We think a lot about public space. That includes parks, but it also includes urban plazas. And then really kind of some of our foundational work is in what we kind of describe as gardens, but residential work. That's really kind of the roots of our firm and our origins, and that kind of speaks to our focus on craft and durability and really relationships. I think the founders of our firm, and this is a tradition that's carried forward, the relationships with our clients are really important to us, and oftentimes we're working, especially in residential contexts, with people over decades. So it's something that we invest in early on to really build trust and continue that into the future. And so across project types, there's really kind of a set of ethics or values that tie all of our work together. So, we like alliteration in this talk, I guess, but people, place, and purpose is really kind of like how we think about, what are we deciding to work on? What are we bringing the value? And, some of those goals that come around, or the kind of beliefs that tie our work together, are about the belief that landscapes inspire shared experiences and learning. These are places of discovery and inspiration. Plants connect people in place. So, Emily will talk about her love of plants and has throughout the day. We love plants too. Beauty enriches daily life. I think, beauty is not something that's talked about in as a value in design a lot of times. It's kind of, subjective or in the background. We believe that beauty really matters, and it's a kind of a skill that we bring as landscape architects to the world. And then the last one is landscapes are expressions of cultures and people and histories. And so we're, really interested in as a practice, how are we designing places that are revealing those things, lifting them up, making them part of the project so it's authentic and really rooted in a place. So a little bit about how we work in our office. I just wanted to share some photos of our office in Cambridge. I think it's really kind of reflective of our process. We, our office is very tied to academia. We have a lot of people that teach, and so we really think of our office as kind of like a studio culture. So we have tons of pin-up space. We're always kind of like iterating, testing things, pinning it up, talking about it, debating ideas. We have 2 design libraries in our office. One is a kind of more traditional library where we use for research and precedence early in a project, but we also have a materials library, which we love to bring clients and collaborators to and really get hands-on. So really kind of like at 2 ends of how we work on a project. Our office is an open floor plan. We're not organized by project teams or hierarchy. Everyone is sitting mixed together. So you might be sitting next to someone who's working on a totally different project from you, and you're kind of learning through osmosis in that way. Another really important part of our work in our office is drawing together. And that can be digital or by hand, but really by hand. We love drawing together. We like making things, and it's a really great way for people to sit around the table and kind of test and collaborate. So we do that in a lot of different ways, and we do it all the way through the design process. On the top, we're really thinking about early on concepts, extraction, how can we peel apart the layers and kind of study these things and kind of extract the essential elements of a site. But then we're also using it to test site designs and options. And so, the project on the bottom is a courtyard on Yale's campus. And so we're thinking about how do those layers come back together? What is the spatial relationship between them? What is the context of the site? And how are those things kind of interacting? And we also like to use it for kind of vignettes, really thinking about the kind of experiential pieces of a site. What is the texture and the planting? This is at a project we're working on in Chattanooga. And these were studies looking at how reclaimed materials might really express the kind of history of the site throughout the project. And then we love being hands-on. We're super involved in the construction process. We are not a design build firm, but we spend a lot of time on site during construction, working with contractors, working with our clients, making sure that the design is getting implemented and the kind of intent is being carried through. And then the last thing is visiting work. We love to visit our own work as an office and kind of evaluate how it's doing, what's successful, what's not. We love visiting the work of other offices and kind of understanding, ways that they're innovating that we can learn from. And so visiting places, getting to know places and projects is really fun and important to us as well.
So Lydia just said she works in a team with 70 people. At SMM in New Orleans, we have 10 people. Our intern just started last week, so I don't have a photo of her yet, but we are 10 people.
I saw her.
She saw her, she exists. And I think what I want to say about my team is they are incredible. I sometimes stand back on a Friday afternoon and I'm like, whoa, we got so much work done this week. We achieve incredible things. And so I would say this team is like, we're small, but we are mighty. And because we're so small and we're nimble, we're able to like adapt and change and respond to different projects' needs. And we always have something going on, or, you know, we can adjust quickly as needed or move more people to a project if we need to, or things like that. So we're able to be very nimble. We're all very hands-on. There's a lot of learning by osmosis in our office. We have an open floor plan as well. And so what I've always loved about working in a small firm is just learning by overhearing people talk on the phone to contractors, to clients, to an engineer, and being like, and then afterwards being like, what were you talking about? What was that about? Like, can you tell me more about that? And then getting to like work on more than one project at a time, seeing how you can learn something from someone else's project. I've always loved that part of being in a smaller team. This is our sort of like guiding philosophy. We, like Lydia mentioned, like I think our firms, you'll see, have a lot of overlaps here in the things we value and the things we believe in. But we really believe that, you know, we're rooted in context. And I think that's something that I think we heard from all of you today, that you're getting that as well. In terms of our design process, I think options would be a good way to describe that. We really like options in our office. It's sort of a joke, actually. When new people start, they're just like, just make a bunch of options. And I think we've been giving you all that advice today in your studios as well. But we often find inspiration in nature and in natural forms. In this case, on this project, it was waves and dunes. This project was in Michigan, and so these are sand dunes on Lake Michigan. As an inspiration and a concept starting point for a bench design that was going to be like a big unifying feature in a plaza. And so we started with this natural form, we started with hand sketching, and we often go back and forth between hand sketching, modeling it in 3D, looking at it, looking at the scale, going back to hand sketching, putting it on the site, seeing how big it is, iterating that some more, and then, you know, again and again, this sort of like continues on throughout a project. Sometimes at the end, sadly, this one did not make it into the final construction documents. It was very sad that we worked on it for a very long time and it did not make it. The other thing that is very much part of our process, and I love and I find hilarious, is that we go outside with measuring tapes all the time. Our neighbors around our office, like, they're like, who are these crazy people that are always like out in the street with a measuring tape, measuring things and pacing things off, and like holding up sticks and being like, do you think this feels right? Does this feel too big? Does this feel, you know, and we go out and we want to feel it in our bodies, like how big these things are. What is the culture of our office like? This is, if you follow us on Instagram, I would say this assemblage of pictures is what our office is like. We really invest in each other. We care about each other. We take cakes very seriously. It's Mardi Gras right now. We have a whole spreadsheet of king cakes that we want to try. We score them. We rate them. We talk about the ones we like. Options. We like options. For people's birthdays, we do a lot of research into local bakeries. That person's personality always comes out in their cake, both in the flavor and the decoration. This was Pilar's. She was really into Britney Spears that year. It was a free Britney thing. The second one from the top was Wes's. He's really into prairie meadow landscapes, and he was going to American Prairie in Montana right after that, right after we had his birthday cake. So his birthday reflected his love of the American Prairie. I would say we love plants in our office. We really like plants. We're plant people. We're always talking about growing plants and bringing each other veggies from our yards and things like that. And we also really love color. I would say, like, as an office, we're colorful people. We're saturated, colorful people. This was a annual Cosmo planting we did in Clarksdale, Mississippi, just up the road here. This was in 2020. We were experimenting with ways to bring joy and bring people together during the pandemic when we couldn't do some of the other community engagement that we were going to talk about, which is a great segue into what I'm going to talk about a little bit more, which is the next group of people that are involved in project, which are communities. In my practice, I do a lot of work where the community is my client, or a city is my client, or A government agency like the EPA is my client. I mean, we do plenty of commercial work as well. We love a good rooftop pool sometimes, or a garden or a park. But I'm going to talk about communities because this has been really a focus of our work lately. And so I have a couple of, if I had to distill some things down, I have a couple of high-level principles that I think I have learned over the years. The first of which is make no assumptions. Second is quality over quantity. And the third, and maybe most important, and maybe is the core of all landscape architecture and design, is the process is the project. So first I'm going to talk about make no assumptions. And what I mean about this is that whenever you're working with people, and this can go not just for communities, this can go with consultants, other architects, other designers, your client. It's a good idea to not make assumptions either about things that people know or don't know, but also making assumptions about things that are good or bad. And this is a lesson that I think we've learned a lot in our work over the course of many years in many communities, and I'm just going to give you a few examples of what I mean by these things. So the first one is trees. How many people in here think trees are just good? Okay, a lot of you. Trees. I certainly did. I thought trees were just trees are good. Everybody knows that. And that's not the case. Trees are not universally perceived as good. My early memories of trees, I'm so privileged, are climbing trees and playing in trees and picking apples off of trees. There are some folks whose that is not their first memory of a tree. They see trees and they think about a hurricane blowing that tree over onto their home. They think about the tree that is falling apart and the limbs falling off because the city has not been able to maintain the street trees on their street. And my colleague Wes always tells a story about a perception of trees in Detroit that the community thought that the city was cutting down. This was in the 70s. The community thought that the city was cutting down all the trees in their neighborhood to surveil them, because this was during some of the racial unrest in Detroit. So they were the city is cutting down the trees because they're flying helicopters over here to surveil us. But what was really happening was Dutch elm disease. And Dutch elm disease was spreading in the trees, and the city was cutting down the trees because of Dutch elm disease. And so there are perceptions, there are things that happen in all of our experiences, and we just should not assume things are all good or bad. Another one is kids are so smart. Kids know so much. Kids are the most creative people you'll ever meet. They are so compassionate. They have ideas that are first about, they don't want to ask for a basketball court or whatever. They're well, we need things for little kids. We need things for older people. We need to think about the environment and the future and taking care of our planet. I mean, they're genius. Anytime you get a chance to work with kids and engage kids, this is my favorite part of my job. Another lesson that I've learned recently is working in South Carolina. This is another thing that, again, I was ooh, universally good, land trusts, land conservation, that is gotta be good. And what I learned through working with my client, who is a representative of the Gullah Geechee community there, that is a descendant community of enslaved people who were stolen from Africa, brought over to the Low Country in South Carolina because of their knowledge about how to grow things in these wet, low areas, so rice and indigo and things like that. And her community, they have become landowners, both through buying land over many years. Some were gifted land, and that was hard-fought land. And they don't want golf courses built in their community. They don't want hotels built. They don't want to become Hilton Head, which is just next door. So they don't want development. But there is a deep distrust of the land trust process and the agreements, the legal agreements that go into a conservation easement about signing over your rights to something, and what does that mean while I'm alive? And so that was another one where I had a very eye-opening moment and said, okay, this is another one that is not, you have to think hard about these things. Lastly, this one's just sort of funny. This is a project I just finished in Northwest Arkansas We showed up to do our first community engagement meetings, and this is a space that is right in downtown. It's right off of their main street, and we're starting our community meetings, and we made the assumption that everyone in the community, number one, knew it was a park. Number two, knew where it was. Number three, knew what its name was. And we found out, like, in the first 5 minutes that everyone did not know this was a park, didn't know where it was, and, like, had 7 different names for what this place was called. And we were like, hold on, we got to regroup back here. We got to, like, make another poster. We got to, like, figure out how to talk about this. So, again, make no assumptions. The second one is quality over quantity. And I guess what I want to say about this is community engagement is not about, the metric of community engagement is not about how many people show up to your community meeting or how many surveys you get people to fill out. We are not designing to, like, the average desire of what everybody wants. I don't think that leads to good design. I don't think that really would make anybody happy. And so we're not designing to the aggregate. We're looking for both deep engagement, meaningful storytelling, understanding communities, and also length of time. The more time you can be involved in a community, that is how you get to that good quality, deep engagement. And that's hard, and sometimes our projects don't allow for that as much as we would like, but I think we strive for that and we try really hard to get to those points. So I'm gonna give an example of, over the last year, I had a contract with EPA. We were working with 15 communities across regions 4 and 6, which are basically the whole south part of the country. We were working with communities to help them develop projects, budgets, proposals to submit for a big grant program that EPA had last year. It's called the Community Change Grant Program. It was funded by unprecedented Inflation Reduction Act dollars. And it would have been up to $20 million for these communities. So for the most part, they were rural. These were really small nonprofit organizations we were working with. And we put together a really interesting project team for this project. And I'm going to show you some of his work as we go through this. But the one project from this, as an example, I'm going to talk about is Miami, Oklahoma. And it's Miami, not Miami in Florida. Miami is the tribe Miami that were originally in the Ohio River Valley and got moved during Indian relocation to Oklahoma. So Miami, Oklahoma. Lead was discovered in Miami in the 1890s, and mining operations began immediately thereafter. And it was really this whole tri-state region. So it was lead, it was zinc, cadmium, like a few other heavy metals. And so went like crazy mining, and mining operations wrapped up in the 60s, and they left these. This is called a chat pile, and a chat pile is a bunch of fine aggregate material that is left over after the ore is extracted from the ground after the mining process. And the mining operations just like left this all over the place, dumped on the surface. This is fully contaminated with heavy metals. Kids in Miami and Commerce, this whole area, used to climb up these to play on. They were like hills, they'd roll down them. Think about that. Those white dots, those are what the chat piles look like from space. You can see these chat piles from space. They're enormous. It looks like a moonscape when you're there. And as you might imagine, these just like big open piles, when it rains, the chat runs off, it runs into the creeks, it runs into the streams, it runs into the rivers, it blows around in the air. After the mining stopped, groundwater seeped into the mine cavities and became acid and seeps out of the ground as this orange, bubbly color. And so in 1983, all of Ottawa County, so the entire county, was declared a Superfund site. It's called the Tar Creek Superfund site. Tar Creek is one of the major creeks that runs through the county. And a Superfund site, if you don't know, is like a really bad brownfield. It is a really bad, abandoned, hazardous waste site. And Superfund is actually the name for the EPA program that cleans it up. And so the EPA is here, Department of Environmental Quality is here. Cleanup efforts have been underway for a long time. But I just want you to appreciate the scale of what is going on here. This is Rebecca Jim. Rebecca is the executive director of LEAD agency. LEAD is like an acronym, and I can't remember what it stands for, but it's L-E-A-D, LED. So very intentional. Rebecca started her nonprofit in the 70s to try to advocate for Ottawa County to be designated a Superfund site for the cleanup of her community. She was seeing the health impacts of lead poisoning in the children that she was teaching in the schools. She was seeing the air quality in people's homes. She was advocating for, there's a compounding environmental problem here, which is that there is a downstream dam from Miami that is operated by human beings, and those human beings make choices about when to open and close the dam, and often they make choices about the downstream recreational lake remaining full, and so they don't let a certain amount of water into the dam, or they don't draw down the dam to let rainwater come into the lake, and it floods Miami. And so it floods Miami, it floods toxic water into people's yards, into people's homes, and you can imagine the catastrophic environmental challenge just only gets bigger. And so she is the advocate. She is leading this grassroots community movement to try to clean up her community. She's in a movie that's at Sundance. This is our project team on our initial site visit, driving around, seeing all the chat piles, seeing all of the Superfund work and reclamation efforts that are happening. So Martin and Rebecca are from LEAD agency. My colleague in the middle is our client from EPA. This is my colleague Joey. And we were like the core team working on this project. This is just a beautiful photo taken by the photographer we partnered with on this project, who I'm going to talk about more in a little bit. It looks so beautiful. This is Tar Creek. Looks like there's a mountain in the background. That's a chat pile. And so it's like a picture sometimes doesn't tell the whole story, but this looks very beautiful and scenic, but this is a story of environmental pollution. And so when we came into this community, we were like, what do we do? Like you're already working on this huge environmental problem, and how do we propose a $20 million project? And what can we do about that? And so from Rebecca, our client, she really was like, we need to engage folks about what will bring joy to the community. How can we make maybe smaller scale environmental benefits, but how do we bring joy to folks? And really, how do we change people's relationship with nature? Because in Miami, nature is dangerous. Nature can hurt you. The water is poisonous. The soil is contaminated. And so how do we change people's relationship with nature? And so the only natural area in Miami is Tar Creek. And unfortunately, because this has been going on for decades, kids still swim in it. People still walk alongside it. It's not safe to walk alongside Tar Creek. It's like the EPA has studied it. It's like you shouldn't even take a walk alongside of it. And so we started looking at this park that is upstream of Tar Creek on the Neosho River, which is not contaminated because it is coming from a watershed that is way west of those chat piles that we looked at. But it is flooding because of this dam operation. And so the city is disinvesting in it. There's a pool there, it regularly floods. FEMA said, we're not paying to replace this pool anymore. The city's like, we can't keep up these ball fields, they keep flooding, like we can't maintain this. This is what the park looks like. That picnic table is sinking into the muck. There's just, every time it floods, it's just piling sediment on top of it, and you can't even really sit at this picnic table anymore. And so it's a story of disinvestment in a community. We're losing a park because the city's not going to keep maintaining it. We're losing our parks, we're losing our open space, we don't have access to nature. And so we started working with all the authorities. We started thinking about how could we reinvest in this park and use this grant money as a way to make a new investment, bring joy, change the relationship with nature, and make it a program that is totally acceptable to be flooded. And so this part of the plains, this tall grass prairie habitat, let's make it a nature park. Let's reinvest in tall grass prairie. Let's make it nature trails, nature play. Let's put things that are sensitive to flooding on the highest ground. Let's reconceptualize this park and transform it into something that can bring joy and change a relationship with nature. So this is all of us, again, in our traditional community meetings. And then this was the proposal for Riverview Park that we submitted in a grant application to the EPA last fall. And then I was mentioning one of my favorite collaborations on this project, and all these people, the clients, obviously, the other consultants, the architects, all the engineers and city permitting people we had to talk to, and floodplain managers, so many people involved in informing this proposal. But what I loved about this project was a unique collaboration we had with a photographer. His name is Giancarlo D'Agostaro. He's based in New Orleans. He came with us to all 15 communities, and he's a really talented photographer. And he interviewed people in the community everywhere we went, asked them questions about their hopes and dreams, asked them questions about stories of resilience in their communities, how they've noticed the changing climate over their lives, and took these really beautiful portraits of them. And so these are just examples of some of the people we met, some of our clients, and it just led to really deep, unique stories, and each story led to a really different, really amazing design outcome. And these stories with folks, are often a way into a project. This is one I'll just talk about really quickly because I am too passionate about all of this stuff. But during COVID, again, we were really struggling with how do we engage people when we can't be together in a room, and Zoom's awful, and it's really hard to get people to trust you and tell you things on a Zoom call. So we did an experimental project. We called it Talk Tree to Me. And we did it in Detroit. We paired a local Detroiter with a tree that was located on the Detroit riverfront. It was part of the month of design. If you've ever gone to Detroit for the month of design, it's September every year. It's very cool. And we designed a chat bot where we programmed the chatbot with questions and conversation topics from these people paired with the tree. There were topics that were about trees and questions about trees. And then we made these, we called them tree jewelry. And we hung the tree jewelry in Detroit. And so folks who were just out exercising during COVID could walk by and text with the tree. We picked texting because texting is sort of an intimate form of communication already. It feels private. It feels like something you're willing to do. And the results of this were really fascinating and really poignant. And some people said really interesting things. So, this Serviceberry said, "I'm really into how trees, especially the roots, talk to each other." So, if you're planted in a grove and other trees that you're connected to and they're sort of working off each other, I love that. But what if you're a loner? And the person texted back, then you have more room for your roots to grow. And so, there were just some really cool, fascinating things that came out of this engagement. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier about making assumptions about trees and people liking trees, this was another way for us to get at some of those issues. So I'm gonna speed up. The process is the project. This is true for every project, no matter if it's a community-based project or not. This is a project we did in Detroit. It was one of the first neighborhood plans with the city of Detroit. It began as a planning project this is in Northwest Detroit, looking at the quarter square mile of the Fitzgerald neighborhood and the commercial corridors of Livernois Avenue and McNichols Avenue. Like any good project, we started with site analysis. This neighborhood was selected by the city of Detroit because it had 50% vacancy. So that means that 50% of the lots and homes in the neighborhood were vacant. And this is a tipping point that Detroit has found where at 50%, it could go either way. It could go up or it could go down. And once it goes down below 50%, it's really hard to get a neighborhood back. So we looked at a lot of things in this neighborhood. We looked at clusters of existing homes close together. We looked at, the developer of this neighborhood, the through streets only go halfway through, so there's no connection through the western half. There are universities on both sides. There's commercial corridors. We looked at aggregate groups of, we have one lot by itself, we have 2 lots, we have 3 lots, we have 6 lots together. we came to find that there's this really interesting grouping of collection of vacant lots together in the center of the neighborhood. And we saw that as an opportunity for a new park. This neighborhood didn't have parks nearby. And so, this was our strategy of neighborhood stabilization. How do we stabilize this neighborhood through landscape strategies and beautification? So we started with traditional community meetings on this one, and I would say over the course of this project, our client, the city of Detroit, really grew and learned a lot of things about community engagement too. And I think they do it a lot better now, and they've developed a whole different system, and I think that was part of this collaboration of working through this project. We mocked up our designs to get feedback. So this is looking at a greenway we proposed through the neighborhood, and we painted it with students from UD Mercy and neighborhood residents to both see, how do you think about this? Is this in the right spot? Is it the right width? We worked with a workforce development group who recruited neighbors who were involved in the clearing of sites, the prepping of the construction, involved in maintenance. We had community meetings at the park site itself to visualize, here's a rendering, that's gonna be over there. What do you think, to really help people be able to visualize what this space would be like. This was the final rendering of what that would look like. We mocked up the path and took kids on tours to see, where the path would go in the future park. And then during construction, this is Hubert Massey. He is an artist, a muralist, and a mosaic tile artist. He developed a mural that was going to be installed in the park during construction, and community members would come to community meetings and then help make the tiles that would get used in the murals. And then during construction, we had a couple of community build days where folks from the community came and helped install the murals. And obviously we had contractors who did some of this. This is a traffic calming device that this park is called Ella Fitzgerald Park. This is like a chord progression from Dream a Little Dream of Me as a traffic calming device. And that is the finished park in the heart of the neighborhood. We really think that community engagement is not a phase of a project. Community engagement is the whole project. It has to go the whole way from site analysis, concept design, all the way through construction. And this is the way you build investment. It's the way you build your stakeholders, and you get people involved, and you build ownership in a park that long after we're done designing it and building it, that folks are still going to want to take care of it. They're going to want to program it. They're going to feel like it's our community's park. This project was part of Reimagining the Civic Commons, which is a Kresge and Knight Foundation program, and they studied the impact of these projects from our planning process in 2017 before we started until 2023. And these are some slides. There's a whole report on this if you want to look it up. But I think measuring the outcome of what we do as landscape architects is really powerful. It's something we're still figuring out how to do, but LAF is getting really good at this and doing more of this, and measuring what we do, I think helps us convey the value of what we do as landscape architects. And I think when you do community engagement in a really meaningful way, where it's this whole length of the project, where it's really deep, then you can get to outcomes like this. So I don't know, this one seemed fascinating to me. This is Detroit. This is Detroit post-bankruptcy. When we started the project, people were like, yeah. The city has told us they're going to do stuff before. And I think through these projects, we were able to move the needle on this. Folks spending time with each other as neighbors, and then the perceptions of their neighborhood. Again, when we started this project, there was 50% vacancy. People were not feeling optimistic about their neighborhood. And through the course of this project, that turned around.
All right. So I am going to flip to something that, a group of people that I feel like we never talked about in school, which is the contractors. And I know some of you are in a kind of, not in here. You do talk about it all the time, which is why I wanted to talk about it in a lecture, because I don't think that we have, we just love to show pictures of finished work and the kind of concept behind the design, and that is all very important to us, but the way that we execute the work is through working with contractors. So I wanted to spend a little time peeling back the ways that we collaborate, the ways that we use them as a source of knowledge, the ways that we build trust with them, and really work together towards shared goals in the design. When I first started working, and the first time I went on a construction site, I was about a year into my career. I got totally thrown into a project. I was managing it by myself. I had no idea what I was doing. And I never was taught, how do you interact with a contractor? And so I got out on site, and I think like this instinct or this kind of like idea in your head starts to kind of like push forward when you're nervous and you don't have the answers. Like, I have to hold my ground. I'm supposed to have all of the answers here. I have to be like looking for like ways that they're trying to take advantage of us. Like contractors are the enemy kind of mentality. And really like that isn't fun. It's super stressful way to operate. And it's like really doesn't bring good collaboration or respect or trust between the people that you're working with. So that was a huge lesson.
Good outcomes.
Or good outcomes. So that was a huge lesson learned for me. It was like learning how to build a relationship with these people who were building the thing that you spent years designing. So I have a few takeaways as well that I'll kind of weave through a couple of projects that I'm going to share. The first one, which Emily talked about this as well with engagement, but same thing with the design. Design doesn't end when you finish your drawing set. You are designing all the way through construction, and you know, if you're doing it right, I think, because problems will come up and you have to come up with solutions on the spot, and you're continuing to test things, or you're getting out there and you're like, oh, we really spent a lot of time doing that, but I actually don't think it's right. And like, if you have the right client, you can have that conversation. Contractors as a resource and a team member. Again, like these are people, especially for us when we're working across the country, they have local knowledge and expertise that we're not going to bring to the table. And so really treating them from the beginning as a collaborator and a partner in the process makes a better outcome. They bring solutions to the table that we aren't going to know about or think of. And so that allows us to kind of really work together. And then the last one is about our role as landscape architects, as designers. And this doesn't just apply to contractors, this applies to almost anyone that we are working with, but the idea that we are advocates and educators for landscape architecture and about the design and about the work we're doing. So really helping people see the things that we can see as trained designers that other people can't see. And that, you know, specifically applies to contractors in terms of like, you know, bringing them into the design process, having a conversation, showing them the renderings, telling them about the inspiration behind the design, standing out in the field and saying like, right here, this was really important because we want to make sure that we're capturing this view, like giving them the context to execute what you can't see in a set of construction documents, I think brings a sense of kind of shared ownership and excitement about the work. So the first project that I want to kind of start to talk through with some of this is Peter mentioned the New Orleans Museum of Art Sculpture Garden. This was one of the first projects. This was not my project where I didn't know what I was doing, but one of my first projects that I worked on in the office. We spent 5 years in design and construction of this project. It's located in City Park, which is a historic park, very large park in New Orleans. And our client was the New Orleans Museum of Art. And so this is a 6.5 acre expansion to their what was an existing sculpture garden, and it's free and open to the public. So it has a really great mission of bringing world-class art really to anyone that wants to have the chance to interact with it. So, you know, I mentioned that I work in an office of 70 people, but we try to keep our project teams really small and intimate. And so this is the team that worked on Noma, Doug, Leslie, John, and myself. We're often working in teams of 3, 4, 5 people. And our teams we put together stay together from concept all the way through construction, which is really key, in our opinion, of making sure that the kind of like big ideas, the inspiration, the research that was kind of brought together at the beginning of a project is translating all the way down into like the tiniest detail. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So obviously this is a sculpture garden. We really wanted to think about what would make this unique as an experience, and the idea that we were really drawing from and kind of evoking the Louisiana landscape as a setting for sculpture was really the kind of bigger picture idea here. We weren't designing around particular pieces of art. We wanted to design a set of environments that art could be, sited within. And again, we love to boil things down and think about what are the essential elements of a park or a place, and thinking about City Park, the kind of historic legacy there. It's really all comes down to water, circulation, and vegetation. And so we wanted to make sure we were infusing these things in this garden. It felt connected to the larger City Park idea. And so, all through the design, we're thinking about how do those three elements layer, interact, weave together to form kind of a different experience of art in the landscape. This is our project team on the project. So we were prime on the project. We were leading the project, had a whole set of consultants. We had a kind of two-headed client here, the museum, but there was also a donor of the art collection that we were working very closely with. And I think the other really interesting thing about this project in particular is the contractor came on board while we were still in design development. So they were in our design meetings, they were hearing about the ideas, they were seeing them evolve, they were hearing the feedback, so they had the context of what was important and what needed to kind of come through in construction. So this is the park, or the garden within the park. You can see downtown New Orleans in the background. But this process of kind of testing and iterating and kind of helping people see is super important when the construction site looks like this for years. So we were in a mudscape for forever, and it you get disoriented, you kind of forget how big things are gonna be. So the idea of testing things, staking them out, doing mock-ups became really, really important on this project, especially because we had a lot of really kind of custom elements. Again, people involved on site. This is a typical group on a site visit when we're walking around and kind of checking progress. This is our donors, the museum leadership, the curatorial team, the contractors, the architects, the client rep, the cost estimator. We have a whole trove of people that we're moving around when we're viewing work on site. And that also comes down to when we're testing things and looking at mock-ups. That same group of people is all evaluating that mock-up, but they all have different priorities. So having a conversation in front of a built thing to be able to point to and make decisions about was really important on this project. So I'm going to talk about one very specific example, and you're going to think I'm a little bit crazy, but I mentioned circulation is really important here. There's a lot of really beautiful, mature live oaks that had really compromised root systems, and we were really interested in this kind of sinuous, meandering path network that was obviously avoiding the root systems, but bringing you through these different environments that I talked about. So we went through this process of drawing the circulation, sending it to the surveyor. They would flag it and stake it out. We'd go on a site visit. We'd move the flags around. We'd take key measurements. We'd come back with a crumpled site plan that had a bunch of notes on it and was also got rained on and you couldn't read it anymore. The surveyor would go back out, pick up the points of the flags we moved, send it back to us. We'd put it in our CAD file. We'd adjust our circulation. And we went through this for months. We were doing this during design, we were doing this into construction, and this became really key because the root systems are so sensitive and so compromised on the site, and we were really wrestling with this kind of arcing boardwalk that brings you out over the lagoon system and then lands you back on land. We were wanted that to be a beautiful, simple experience. It's made up of only 3 simple arcs. And we were testing over and over, where does this need to land when it comes back around to the site so that it's not going to interfere with tree roots. And so we got really obsessed with this branch of this tree where we were there's this magical experience of this beautiful arc that we want to bring people out over the water. You're in the sunlight, and then you're entering under this beautiful arching threshold, and then you're like in the deep shade and canopy of this live oak. And so we started really trying to refine, like, how do we get that arc to be like simple and beautiful and continuous with the paver path that it's going to meet when you come off the boardwalk. So here you can see like the piles in the background. You know, I have dozens, probably like hundreds of pictures of this tree branch where we're like always out there trying to figure it out. You can see us again, we're like surveying the center line of this path, looking at how it's going to meet the boardwalk, you know, tweaking things, thinking about how that path continues on to the garden afterwards. And then, you know, it comes down to like communicating that with the contractors. So here we're talking with Frank and Aaron, who are general contractors. They understand the intent. They're like communicating with the surveyors and making sure the trades understand that this is really, really important, and we've been designing for this for like years. And so then it comes down to like, you've got the carpenters building the boardwalk, and you've got the masons building this path, and they have to meet perfectly, and the arc has to continue and be like this like beautiful moment that like you would never notice took so much work. It has to be kind of effortless. So that's, you know, I think this was a great example of like, there was so many layers of testing and people involved to get this to be like a really beautiful, simple experience. So this is like the boardwalk coming out off of the path earlier in the garden, and then this kind of like simple, continuous experience of like passing under this like awesome tree branch. And then, you know, obviously the other goal here was preserving the existing trees, which are doing great and have really been revitalized through the project. The other really, really quick example I want to give here is about kind of giving agency to your contractor to kind of like execute your design intent. The planting here was really about like evoking like the familiar in the Louisiana landscape, but putting it in a kind of interesting setting and contrasting it with art. We were, you know, had this really layered planting plan of ground cover, shrubs, understory, canopy, obviously. And in our documentation set, we didn't draw every single individual ground cover that we wanted to plant, but we had this really specific idea about this kind of mosaic of ground covers that we wanted to use, and we wanted this kind of like directionality and this grain in the ground cover. We had an idea about which one was going to be dominant and which ones were going to be accents. And so we developed this tool called the dot diagram for the contractors to use as like a guide when they were out there laying out the plants. And so the dot diagram like caught on, everybody had a copy of it, everyone was talking about the dot diagram, and we used that as like a mock-up exercise with them out there where we had a set of ground covers and we were all able to kind of like work through different scenarios like, okay, well when you come into a tree root, this is how you're gonna like modify it, or if you come up against a path, this is how you're going to modify it. So it gave them the agency to kind of make decisions on their own without us kind of like standing over their shoulders while they're placing every single plant.
How many ground covers were in this project?
I mean, thousands.
Okay. Yeah.
Thousands.
Okay.
So that worked really well, and I think made people feel like, you know, they're not being micromanaged. Okay, I'll go quick here. This is on the flip side, I think a lot of times in lectures, like residential work doesn't get presented, so I wanted to share a residential project, and this is really like, we're zooming down. You know, we talked about circulation, we talked about planting. I'm gonna talk about, you know, a terrace now, and then I'm gonna get down to a handrail. This is a residential project that we've been working on in Houston for several years, started before COVID. This was a very ambitious client. They wanted to like start building immediately, which was great, but it also meant that we were kind of like designing in a circle around the site and like getting started and then starting to build it, and then we're designing the next piece and starting to build it, and it was kind of like a kickstarting a loop. This was our team that worked on this project, Eric, Garrett, Ambika, Echo, and myself from our office. This is a beautiful, beautiful piece of property and house. It has a 1960s modernist house on the property, on the historic register. There was tons of photographs from the like 50s and 60s that we were able to reference. This wasn't a project that was like explicitly about kind of restoration or preservation, but it was really like a jumping off point and an inspiration for us when we were thinking about this project. So I'm going to talk about one little piece here, the pool terrace, which was like kind of falling apart. Trees had come down in a storm, and the client was really interested in rethinking this as a kind of more unified experience, and thinking about the kind of inside-outside relationship of the house, which was really important. So, we looked through tons of precedents and got super excited about the kind of California, modernist, 60s era Palm Springs. We had, the client just has like a really kind of extravagant, like kooky taste, and we were like, we can do something really different and unexpected here. And so I'm gonna like jump straight to the design, where it was this like series of planted islands that were kind of curvilinear, obscuring your view, like all the way through the property out to the yard, really immersive, and really kind of like fun planting. So of course we modeled this and tested it a lot, moved around these islands and thought about the scale of the spaces, what's for gathering, what's for moving through. But the contractor who we'd been working with for a while at this point and had built some trust with came to us and said, like, okay, we have a really tight schedule. We have like one window to pour the concrete slab for the terrazzo terrace, and if we miss it, it's going to throw off the whole rest of the schedule, and they have a party that they want this finished for. And of course, and they were like, we are nervous about hitting the alignments that you have drawn. We're like not confident about it, and we also want to like make sure we've got one shot, we got to get it right. And so they actually came to us and said, like, we have this idea, are you okay with it, where we want to 3D print and cut out in foam all of the planter alignments in like arcs on the site and lay it out and have you come look at it. So this was really great. You can see Todd and Michael and Cody in the background, our architect and our contractors. And they came up with this method. And so we were able to make adjustments. They strung line all of our jointing patterns. We were able to make sure that that was all aligning correctly. And again, we made adjustments, resurveyed it, and confirmed, and they hit their window to pour the concrete slab. So you can start to see how this kind of builds up in layers, how the jointing patterns coming through, and the Palo Verde, which has this like beautiful yellow pom-pom flower planted on the terrace. And I mentioned this was a really kind of fast project, tight deadline. Sometimes it happens where like everything's happening at once. Like, why are you planting before you're like finishing the paving? And like,
this photo stresses me out so much.
It's like, this is like, you're like,
so stressed.
This person's like trapped in plastic planting ground covers. This person's like grinding terrazzo right next to them. But it all came together and was finished for the party, which was very important. And I think, all of that kind of testing, modeling, laying it out on site allowed us to really make sure that the kind of finished project came together. I also just want to say, outside of this view, the property is like a bomb went off. So like, sometimes photos don't tell the whole truth. And then the last thing I'm going to show is over at the end of this ravine, a pedestrian bridge that we designed as kind of this like experience to bring you out further into the site, into this pavilion that they built out and further in the property. So again, on the theme of testing, we looked at this bridge in many different ways. We had this idea that we really wanted it to be light and thin, and it was a place where you could kind of pause and lean and be comfortable and like look down the length of the ravine. And really enjoy the kind of more immersive parts of the site. We did another mock-up. This was working with 2 different metal fabricators, our contractors, our structural engineer, our architects to coordinate with the materials that were on the pavilion. And it was a super complicated set of pieces that had to come together, and we wanted to make sure we were hiding the structure so it stayed really, really quiet and light and airy. So this mock-up was used for what color are we going to paint the truss under the bridge, how is the handrail post going to meet the fascia, how is the metal grating getting attached to the structure. And one of the things that we were really excited about on this particular design was the handrail of this bridge. We looked at all of these precedents. We wanted it to feel like very sculptural and like a human hand had shaped it, and really comfortable to lean against, but also like you could really like grab it in a comfortable way. And then we were told, we spent forever studying this handrail. And then, you know, it came time to build it, and the metal fabricator was like, I don't think we can build this. And then they were like, let us call around. And they called around the whole country to every specialized metal fabricator in the country, and everyone was like, we can't build this. And so I think this was a lesson for us of like, when they say they can't build something, trust them. But it also sent us back into a really like quick redesign where we were having to evaluate how do we get the same goal and like feeling out of a different material and a different construction method. So we were looking at, so we were working really closely with the contractor at this point, because we had to like really figure out like how can we design something that can actually be built. So we landed on this idea of this sculpted teak handrail. We kind of drew it in a sketch profile, had calls with the contractor to just talk through like, is this possible? And like, as we're designing it, they're thinking about like, how are we going to build this thing? And so the mock-up came back into play. It was still sitting on site. We pulled that back out, and they built a piece of the handrail to test the profile, which we were really happy with. The carpenter got back involved and was helping us with this. And then the contractor came to us with this idea about how could we actually attach the handrail to the post so it's not going to warp, and it's going to hold its shape, and it's going to look like one continuous arcing, beautiful piece of sculpted wood. So they had this idea about these kind of dowels and building this in sections, notching out a place for the kind of metal rail to slot in and be hidden and flush underneath, hide all of the connections. And we were really, really pleased with the way that this turned out. It felt warm, and like it brought some life to the bridge, which has like a lot of metal. And so that was like a really micro example of like, how do we like quickly work together and simultaneously to kind of execute a piece of design. So I think we threw a lot at you. We've got one more C, which isn't really a C, but I think we wanted to end on just having a personal note. Like the other person in all of this is you, is us as designers. And I think one of our biggest lessons has been, or mine has been, about like, how do you not lose yourself in your perspective in the design? I think, you know, you're kind of taught sometimes when you're doing analysis to be super objective and kind of like read a site, you know, and like see what it tells you, and, you know, we're all going to come to the same conclusion. But really, it's like, what is your specific lens, your specific set of you know, interest, places that you know and grew up, like landscapes that you know. I'm working a lot in Louisiana. It's like super valuable when the rest of my team isn't from there, that I can like read that landscape and know that landscape better than anyone else. So I think like bringing your passion and knowledge to the work is super important. It inspires other people. It makes the collaboration more fun, and then they feel respected and like comfortable to share their knowledge as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple themes that I hope you heard that are similar between these groups of people and these types of projects that we were talking about. But as landscape architects, I think we have a superpower. Like, I think landscape architecture is a superpower. We do things that architects don't do, engineers don't do. I think we bring people together. We have the privilege of designing people's communities. We design public spaces. We design those places that create the memories that you hearken back to when you're grown up. And I think empathy and this emotional intelligence and these interpersonal skills, this is something that like is a skill, just like CAD, just like 3D modeling, just like learning how to draw and doing a construction set, that I think we really value. And I think the other part of this is that when we think about design, I think sometimes we think about the final built result of what we do is like what we design. But as designers, as landscape architects, we're designing the process too. We're designing the community engagement process. We're designing the process of design for each project. And we design that for each project. There isn't a one size fits all. There's, this is part of what we design too. So I don't know.
Yeah. We hope this kind of like pulled back the curtain
Yeah.
a little bit on like what happens when you start to execute a project. And I think, it's a continuous learning process. And I think this is just some of our lessons learned to date about like how you work well with people as designers.